In the summer of 1940, thousands of feet above the earth, a U.S. Army paratrooper stands at the open door of an aircraft. The wind tears at his uniform as he stares into the abyss below. His heart pounds against his chest, and in that moment of truth, he shouts one word, "Geronimo!" A battle cry that echoes through time, connecting him to a warrior who defied empires. The year is 1851, in a peaceful Apache camp at Casquille. The desert air carries the scent of pinyon smoke as families gather beneath towering saguaros. A young medicine man named Goyahkla sits with his wife Alope and their 3 children, sharing a meal as the setting sun paints the mountains gold. The peace feels as fragile as morning frost. When Mexican soldiers storm the camp, the night erupts in chaos. Gunfire shatters the darkness. Screams pierce the air. By dawn, Goyahkla's world lies in ashes. His wife, his children, his mother, all slaughtered without mercy. As he stands among the dead, his prayers to Usin, once filled with gratitude, turn to vows of vengeance. The healer dies that day, and in his place rises a warrior who will be known as Geronimo. For the next 3 decades, Geronimo would wage one of the most extraordinary resistance campaigns in history. Armed with little more than courage and an intimate knowledge of the land, he would become a legend, a name that would echo from the canyons of the Southwest to the battlefields of World War II. This is the story of Geronimo, a tale of love transformed into defiance, of a man who refused to bow before 2 empires. The Badonkohe Apache territory stretched beneath the vast southwestern sky, where jagged peaks cut into an endless blue canvas. In this rugged land in 1829, a child named Goyahkla was born in No Doyon Canyon, sharing his first breath with the wind that swept through the sacred mountains. His birth came during a time of relative peace for the Badonkohe Band, one of several Apache groups who had mastered survival in this unforgiving landscape. Like all Apache children, Goyahkla's education began as soon as he could walk. His father, Taklishim, the Gray One, taught him to move like a shadow across the desert floor, to read the stories written in animal tracks, and to honor every kill with prayer. His mother, known for her wisdom in medicinal plants, showed him how to listen to the earth's whispers, which herbs could heal, which could harm, and how to gather them with reverence. The Apache way demanded more than mere survival skills. By age 7, Goyahkla ran barefoot through cactus fields, learning to endure pain without complaint. He practiced holding his breath underwater until his lungs burned, developing the stamina that would later save his life countless times. These weren't just tests of endurance. They were ceremonies of transformation, turning boys into warriors who could protect their people. But Goyahkla showed an unusual gift beyond physical prowess. The medicine men noticed his quiet intensity during ceremonies, the way he seemed to understand the deeper meanings in their sacred songs. They began teaching him their ways, how to interpret dreams, to prepare healing ceremonies, and to bridge the gap between the physical and spiritual worlds. Under their guidance, he learned that true power came not from strength alone, but from harmony with the forces that governed their world. In his late teens, Goyahkla proved himself as both warrior and provider. During one particularly harsh winter, he tracked a wounded deer for 2 days, following nearly invisible signs across frozen ground. When he returned with meat for the hungry camp, the elders nodded in approval. Here was a young man who understood that patience could be as crucial as strength. At 21, he met Alope, a daughter of the Badonkohe Band. Their courtship followed Apache tradition, careful, respectful, and bound by sacred customs. After marriage, they built their wickiup near her family's camp and soon welcomed their first child. 2 more followed, and Goyahkla's days filled with the rhythms of family life, hunting, trading, tending small crops, and teaching his children the ways of their people. Yet even in these peaceful years, signs of change crept across the land. Mexican settlers pushed further north, while American traders spoke of manifest destiny. The Badonkohe elders watched these encroachments with growing concern, but few could have predicted how dramatically their world would soon change. Least of all the young medicine man who still believed that harmony could prevail over conflict. Spring came to Casquille in 1851 with the promise of renewal. The Mexican border town had long served as a trading post where Apache bands gathered to exchange goods and strengthen alliances. On this particular morning, Colonel Jose Maria Carrasco's troops watched from hidden positions as smoke rose from 39 Apache campfires. They had been tracking this band for days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Inside the camp, Goyahkla's family shared their morning meal. Alope nursed their youngest child while their other two played nearby, their laughter mixing with the sounds of daily camp life. No one noticed the unusual silence of the birds, the way the desert creatures had gone still. Goyahkla himself was away, leading a small trading party to a neighboring settlement. The attack came without warning. 200 Mexican soldiers emerged from their positions, their rifles shattering the morning peace. The Apache warriors rushed to defend their families, but they were outnumbered and caught unaware. Bullets tore through wickiups, screams filled the air, and the ground grew dark with blood. When Goyahkla returned at sunset, the camp still smoldered. Bodies lay where they had fallen, women, children, elders. Among the dead, he found Alope, their 3 children, and his mother. Their bodies bore the marks of brutality that went beyond warfare into massacre. I found my aged mother, my young wife, and my 3 small children dead. They were mutilated beyond recognition. This changed my heart to stone. That night, alone among the ashes of his world, Goyahkla performed the death songs for his family. As he sang, something shifted within him. The gentle healer who had sought harmony with the world died alongside his loved ones. In his place rose a warrior whose name would become synonymous with resistance. In the days that followed, Goyahkla sought guidance through traditional Apache ceremonies. During a vision quest, he claimed to hear the voice of Usan, the creator. "No gun will ever kill you. I will take your bullets from the guns of the Mexicans. You will live until your hair turns white." This prophecy would shape his future, giving him the conviction that he was destined to fight. The transformation from Goyahkla to Geronimo happened gradually, then suddenly. His first raids against Mexican settlements were precise and devastating. He struck like lightning, vanishing before reinforcements could arrive. Mexican soldiers in their terror would cry out to St. Jerome, "Geronimo!" and the name stuck, though its bearer would make it mean something far different from the saint it referenced. The massacre at Casquille did more than create a warrior. It forged a leader. Other Apache bands, hearing of his victories, began to look to him for guidance. His tactical brilliance, combined with his spiritual authority, drew warriors to his cause. They saw in him something beyond revenge, a defender of their way of life against forces that threatened to destroy it. By the close of 1851, the transformation was complete. The medicine man who had once sought to heal now led war parties with unprecedented skill. Yet beneath the warrior's exterior, the wounds of Casquille never truly healed. They fueled a resistance that would last for decades, transforming both the man and the landscape he fought to protect. The years following Casquille transformed Geronimo from a man seeking vengeance into a master of desert warfare. Under the mentorship of Cochise, the legendary Chiricahua chief, Geronimo learned to turn the harsh landscape into a weapon. Their partnership would reshape Apache resistance, Cochise providing the strategic vision, Geronimo executing raids with an almost supernatural precision. One of his earliest successes came in the winter of 1852, when he led 30 warriors against a Mexican cavalry unit near the Sierra Madre Mountains. The Mexicans, following standard military doctrine, had made camp in a defensible valley. But Geronimo saw what they didn't: how the evening winds would carry sound, how the steep canyon walls would amplify confusion. His warriors struck from multiple positions, their shots echoing off the rocks, making their small force sound like an army. By dawn, the cavalry unit had been routed, leaving behind weapons and horses that would strengthen future raids. To turn the earth itself against your enemy, Cochise had taught him, is to multiply your force tenfold. Geronimo took this lesson to heart. He studied weather patterns, learned to predict where desert storms would create impassable washes, and used the sun's position to blind pursuing forces. His warriors moved like phantoms across territories that Mexican maps marked simply as desert wasteland. Before each raid, Geronimo led his men in sacred ceremonies. They painted their faces with white clay and yellow ochre, colors of power and protection. Through night-long vigils, they sang songs of strength and invulnerability. These weren't mere rituals. They were psychological preparation for battle. Warriors who rode with Geronimo believed themselves protected by powers beyond the physical world. A turning point came in 1855, when Geronimo orchestrated a series of coordinated attacks along the Mexican border. Instead of striking single targets, he divided his force into small bands that hit multiple settlements simultaneously. The strategy spread panic through the region and prevented Mexican forces from mounting an effective response. This campaign marked him as more than just a skilled warrior. He was becoming a strategic innovator. His reputation grew with each success. Mexican mothers would quiet their children with whispered warnings. Geronimo viene. Soldiers crossed themselves at the mention of his name. Yet among his own people, he was known for his careful planning as much as his ferocity. Before each raid, he personally scouted enemy positions, sometimes spending days observing patterns and routines. He lost few warriors in his operations, a crucial factor in maintaining support among the Apache bands. By 1858, Geronimo's influence extended beyond military matters. At tribal councils, his voice carried the weight of both spiritual and martial authority. He argued for unity among the Apache bands, understanding that their strength lay in their ability to support each other's resistance. When he spoke of his visions, of an Apache homeland free from Mexican and American encroachment, people listened. But with growing power came growing challenges. The U.S. military began to take a more active interest in the border region. American settlers pushed further into traditional Apache territories. Geronimo found himself facing not just one empire, but two, each with resources that dwarfed those of his people. Yet those who rode with him would later speak of his unwavering confidence. "The mountains are our allies," he would tell them, "and our ancestors watch over us." By 1858, Geronimo faced a changing landscape of warfare. The Gadsden Purchase had transferred much of the Apache homeland from Mexican to American control. But for Geronimo and his warriors, both nations remained enemies. What followed was an extraordinary campaign of resistance that would last nearly 3 decades, fought against the backdrop of America's westward expansion and Mexico's struggle to maintain its northern frontier. A masterful raid in 1859 demonstrated Geronimo's evolving tactics. When Mexican forces established a chain of fortified positions along their northern border, Geronimo responded with a strategy that would become his trademark. Instead of attacking the forts directly, his warriors struck the supply lines between them. Over 6 weeks, they intercepted 12 supply trains, gathered crucial resources, and forced the abandonment of 3 fortified positions, all without losing a single warrior. "The Americans bring many soldiers, but they don't know our ways," he told his followers. "The Mexicans know our ways, but they cannot match our spirit." This understanding shaped his hybrid style of warfare. Against American forces, he exploited their lack of desert experience. Against Mexican units, he used their fear of Apache reputation to create panic and confusion. One of his most daring operations came in 1868, when U.S. General George Crook launched a major campaign to force the Apache onto reservations. Geronimo responded by leading his band deep into the Sierra Madre Mountains. From this natural fortress, he conducted lightning raids against both American and Mexican targets, then vanished into terrain so rugged that pursuing forces lost more men to the environment than to combat. The spiritual dimension of his leadership grew stronger during these years. Before major engagements, he would seek visions through traditional ceremonies. These experiences, which he shared with his warriors, often proved tactically prescient. In 1875, following one such vision, he relocated his entire camp just hours before a joint U.S.-Mexican attack struck their previous position. His ability to evade capture became legendary. In 1877, surrounded by more than 1,000 U.S. troops in the Dragoon Mountains, Geronimo led his band, including women and children, through a high mountain pass during a thunderstorm. American scouts declared the route impassable, yet when morning came, Geronimo's people had vanished, leaving no trail to follow. The pressure intensified in the 1880s. The U.S. Army deployed over 5,000 troops, a quarter of its total strength, to capture Geronimo. They established a sophisticated network of heliograph stations for rapid communication. Apache scouts, knowing the terrain and tracking methods, were enlisted to hunt their own people. Yet even against these overwhelming odds, Geronimo's resistance continued. During his final campaign in 1885-1886, he led a band of just 39 warriors, accompanied by their families. This small group managed to elude thousands of Mexican and American troops, covering vast distances across the Southwest, while carrying out raids and gathering supplies. It was during this period that Geronimo demonstrated perhaps his greatest strength, the ability to adapt. When telegraph lines made it harder to surprise settlements, he learned to cut the wires at strategic points. When heliograph stations tracked his movements, he developed methods to deceive them with false trails. Every new military technology was met with an innovative counter-strategy. The toll of constant warfare eventually forced Geronimo's final surrender in 1886. After decades of resistance, the physical and emotional exhaustion of his people had become too great to bear. Yet even in surrender, he maintained his dignity. To General Miles, he said, "Once I moved about like the wind. Now I surrender and that is all. The morning of September 4th, 1886 marked a profound shift in Geronimo's life. As he surrendered to General Nelson Miles at Skeleton Canyon, Arizona, the desert wind carried away the last echoes of Apache freedom. The terms had been clear: surrender in exchange for fair treatment. The reality proved far different. Despite promises of proximity to their homeland, Geronimo and his band were immediately shipped to Fort Marion in Florida as prisoners of war. The journey itself was a calculated display of power. The government paraded them through towns where crowds gathered to gawk at the savage who had defied an empire. At each stop, photographers clamored for images of the captured warrior, unknowingly documenting the beginning of Geronimo's transformation from military opponent to cultural icon. The humid Florida climate proved devastating. Apache warriors who had survived decades of combat succumbed to tuberculosis and malaria. Children, torn from their desert home, withered in the unfamiliar environment. After 2 years of watching his people suffer, Geronimo petitioned for their transfer. The army relocated them to Mount Vernon Barracks in Alabama, where conditions marginally improved. Yet even in captivity, Geronimo displayed remarkable adaptability. He learned English, adopted Western clothing when advantageous, and began to understand the power of his own legend. In 1898, the Army moved him and the surviving Apache prisoners to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Here, Geronimo reimagined his role, no longer a warrior chief, but a keeper of Apache memory and an unexpected celebrity. At Fort Sill, he took up farming, worked as a laborer, and embraced Christianity while maintaining traditional Apache spiritual practices. This duality characterized his later years: a warrior-turned-farmer who signed autographs for tourists, a converted Christian who still conducted Apache ceremonies in secret. He earned money by selling photographs and crafts, charging for his signature and making appearances at fairs and exhibitions. The 1904 St. Louis World's Fair marked the peak of Geronimo's public life. Displayed as a living exhibit, he sold photographs and autographs for 25 cents each, using his earnings to buy gifts for children who visited him. When President Theodore Roosevelt invited him to march in the 1905 inaugural parade, Geronimo seized the opportunity to plead his people's case, requesting to return to the land of my fathers. Roosevelt denied the request. In 1905, Geronimo collaborated with S.M. Barrett on his autobiography. The resulting work, while filtered through Barrett's interpretation and government censorship, preserved crucial elements of Apache history and Geronimo's perspective. "I am not ashamed of my past," he dictated. "I fought for my people, my land, and my way of life." His final years at Fort Sill were marked by quiet dignity and continued advocacy for his people. Though confined, he maintained his role as a spiritual leader and keeper of traditions. He tended a small garden, rode in the local 4th of July parades, and continued telling his story to visitors, ensuring that the Apache perspective would survive. On February 17, 1909, Geronimo was thrown from his horse while riding home in a winter storm. Lying injured in the cold, he developed pneumonia. He died 6 days later, still a prisoner of war, still hundreds of miles from his homeland. His last words to his nephew were a reflection on his journey. "I should never have surrendered. I should have fought until I was the last man alive." When Geronimo died in 1909, newspapers across America announced the passing of the most famous Indian ever known to the white man. But his true legacy would prove far more complex and enduring than those headlines suggested. In death, as in life, Geronimo transcended simple categorization: warrior, prisoner, celebrity, symbol of resistance. For many Native Americans today, particularly the Apache, Geronimo represents unwavering resistance to cultural erasure. Contemporary Apache leader Harlan Geronimo speaks of his great-grandfather's legacy. He fought not just against physical enemies, but against the destruction of our way of life. That fight continues today. Modern Apache communities invoke his name in their ongoing struggles for sovereignty, land rights, and cultural preservation. The transformation of Geronimo into a battle cry carries its own complex legacy. When paratroopers of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment first shouted his name in 1940, they sought to channel his courage and defiance. The practice spread throughout the military, ultimately reaching its controversial apex in 2011, when Geronimo was used as the code name for Osama bin Laden in the raid that led to his death. a choice that sparked intense debate about cultural sensitivity and historical memory. His influence extends deep into American popular culture. Books, films, and television shows have portrayed him alternately as a bloodthirsty savage, a noble warrior, and a tragic hero. Each interpretation reveals more about the era that produced it than about Geronimo himself. A 1939 film showed him as a dangerous villain. By the 1990s, documentaries emphasized his role as a freedom fighter and cultural leader. The continuing controversy over his remains highlights unresolved tensions in American history. His grave at Fort Sill has become a pilgrimage site, but many Apache believe his spirit cannot rest until his remains return to his homeland. In 2009, Harlan Geronimo filed a lawsuit against the U.S. government, Yale University, and the secret society Skull and Bones over alleged possession of Geronimo's remains, a case that merged historical injustice with modern legal battles for indigenous rights. In military circles, Geronimo's tactical innovations are still studied. His methods of irregular warfare, use of terrain, and ability to maintain resistance against superior forces have influenced modern military doctrine. The U.S. Army's Special Operations School at Fort Bragg includes analysis of his campaigns in their strategic studies. Among environmental activists and indigenous rights advocates, Geronimo's deep connection to the land has become a rallying point. His warnings about the destruction of Apache territories prove prescient as modern debates rage over land use, resource extraction, and sacred site preservation. His words, "The earth is our mother," appear frequently at environmental protests. For modern Apache youth, Geronimo represents both inspiration and challenge. Many struggle to reconcile his violent resistance with contemporary paths to justice, even as they draw strength from his unwavering defense of Apache rights. Educational programs at San Carlos and other Apache reservations teach his story, as part of a larger narrative of survival and adaptation. Perhaps most significantly, Geronimo's legacy challenges Americans to confront uncomfortable truths about their nation's history. His story embodies the complex relationships between resistance and power, between cultural preservation and forced assimilation, between memory and myth. Each generation reinterprets his life through the lens of its own struggles and aspirations. As the American West changes with new battles over water rights, land use, and cultural heritage, Geronimo's words continue to resonate. "I am not ashamed of my past. I fought for my people, my land, and my way of life." In an era of renewed activism for indigenous rights and environmental protection, his legacy provides both inspiration and warning, a reminder that the issues he fought for remain unresolved. Today, Geronimo's name evokes not just historical memory but living struggles. Whether invoked by activists fighting for indigenous rights, soldiers seeking courage, or artists exploring American identity, his legacy remains dynamic and contested. He stands as a testament to the power of resistance, the complexity of survival, and the enduring spirit of a people who refuse to be forgotten.